Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the WMATA Board of Directors Executive Committee meeting. Before we begin, I'd like to ask our Chief Safety Officer, Teresa Empasado, to provide us with our safety contact. Ms. Empasado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Electrical Safety Foundation commemorates
Teresa, you're muted.
You're muted, Teresa.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Electrical Safety Foundation commemorates National Electrical Safety Month each May with a campaign to educate key audiences about the steps that can be taken in order to reduce the number of electrically related fires, fatalities, injuries, and property loss. This year's theme is connected to safety and focuses on how to make sure your home is electrically safe, secure, and efficient through the use of smart devices and continuing to exercise vigilance in following safety guidelines. Regularly inspect electrical cords for damage and do not attempt to make repairs to any damaged cords or plugs. Do not overload circuits and avoid using extension cords. If you must use an extension cord, ensure that the cord is appropriately rated for the electrical load it will bear. Lastly, consider making small upgrades to everyday devices, such as swapping incandescent bulbs and fixtures for safer and more energy efficient LEDs. For more information, visit esfi.org. That concludes our morning safety contact.
Thank you, Ms. Empasado. And before we begin, I want to welcome everyone again to our Executive Committee meeting, but have some important business to do this morning, and I want to extend a very warm welcome to our newest board member from the District of Columbia, Lucinda Babbers. Welcome, Lucinda.
Thank you.
And the board corporate secretary swore in Ms. Babbers earlier this week so she could participate in meetings prior to her first public swearing in this morning. Also, alternate director Tony Costa is filling in today for Director Stephen McMillan. And Tony, welcome back. Good seeing you.
Good morning. Thanks.
Since this is our first meeting of the day, I'd like to ask our board corporate secretary, Ms. Ellison, to please call the roll. Ms. Ellison.
Thank you. Chair Smedberg.
Present.
Vice Chair Genevieve Jenkins.
Present.
Second Vice Chair Mr. Goldman.
I am present.
Alternate Director Costa.
Present.
Director Letourneau.
Present.
Director Babers.
Present.
Director Slater.
Present.
Alternate Director Rouse.
Present.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. Our next agenda item is to approve the agenda. If there are no objections, we'll consider the agenda approved as presented. Are there any objections by any of the committee members? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. Next, we'll move on to the approval of the minutes. We have the minutes of our March 25th, 2021 meeting before us for approval. Are there any objections or corrections to the minutes as presented? Hearing none, we'll consider the minutes approved as presented. Now we'll move on to our action items. Our first action item is the acceptance of the OIG report. And we'll hear that report by the Inspector General. Under the board's bylaws, the Executive Committee has the responsibility of reviewing and accepting audits and other reports by the OIG. The committee has reviewed the following reports: Special Project Report, Metro Transit Police Department Internal Affairs. And before we take a vote, Mr. Charrington, would you like to provide the committee with any highlights from your report?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. In February 2020, the OIG initiated a proactive review of MTPD's Internal Affairs Unit, known as the OPRI. The MTPD investigates complaints against sworn officers in a manner generally consistent with its policies. However, the MTPD's policies have not been revised since 2014. We determine the MTPD's policies do not adequately address all the constitutional warnings that may be required during internal investigations. The OIG recommends that complaints against senior MTPD officials at the rank of captain and above, as well as other allegations of a sensitive nature, be brought to OIG's attention for possible OIG investigation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Charrington. First, we'll go to the committee members. If anyone has a question or comment, if you would go ahead and raise your hand electronically. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none. Acceptance, or I should turn to other board members. Are there any other board members who have a question or comment? Okay, seeing none, acceptance of this report constitutes the board's authorization to post it on the WMATA website, provided that the Inspector General has conferred with the General Counsel and confirmed that any private or confidential information has been removed, redacted, in accordance with applicable law and WMATA policy. I would like to move approval of this item. Is there a second from a committee member?
Second, Mr. Chair.
Seconded by Mr. Goldman. Any final comments or questions? Hearing none, Ms. Ellison, please call the roll.
Chair Smedberg,
Aye.
Vice Chair Gideby Jenkins,
Aye.
Vice Chair Goldman,
Aye.
Mr. Costa.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. This report has been accepted and the Inspector General has been authorized to post it online. Since there is no further business to come before the committee this morning, we stand adjourned. Now we will begin the Finance and Capital Committee meeting, and I'll turn the floor over to Secretary Slater to get that meeting started. Secretary Slater.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to the May Finance and Capital Committee meeting. I'm Secretary Greg Slater. In this committee's Vice Chair. Chair McMillan is not able to join us today, so I'm serving as chair. As the first order of business is to approve the agenda. If there are no objections, please consider the agenda approved as presented. Are there any objections by members of the committee to the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. Now with the approval of the minutes, we have the minutes of the April 8th meeting before, now with the approval of the agenda, we have the April 8th meeting minutes before us for approval. Are there any objections to the minutes as presented? Hearing none, we'll consider the minutes approved as presented. So thank you everyone for working with us through that. We have two items on today's agenda, one action, one information. The first is to approve supplemental bond resolution, terms of sale, bond purchase agreement, and offering statement for Series 2021A dedicated revenue bonds. These bonds will support Metro's capital improvement program, and their issuance was authorized by the board in March. Next, we'll have an update on Metro Rail and Metro Bus service as the region prepares to enter the recovery phase of the pandemic. We'll review the current service, including additions coming in June, and discuss the recent customer research that provides really valuable insight in preparing for future ridership. With that, I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Anasicki and his team to begin today's presentations. As a reminder, I'll ask staff to please introduce yourselves when you are presenting, and I'd like to ask everyone to turn off their camera and mute their microphone when not speaking.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Dennis Anasicki, Chief Financial Officer for Metro. I will share my slide. Please let me know if you can see the slide.
We can, Dennis.
Thank you, sir. Last March, the board authorized staff to issue Series 2021A debt to fund Metro's capital program. Today, staff is back to seek final authorization for a negotiated sale of the bonds based on the terms of the issuance as reflected in the supplemental bond resolution, the bond purchase agreement, and the preliminary official statement. As directed by the committee, these documents have been shared with jurisdictional staff and they resulted in some questions and suggested changes. Metro has responded to all the questions received and modified the preliminary official statement to capture the change requested by the District of Columbia. Finally, Mr. Chairman, the proposed issuance amount and terms are consistent with what the board approved in March 2021. This slide provides a timeline of prior actions taken on this bond as well as related actions that will take place, assuming board authorization of the issuance. The next two slides are ones that the committee saw as part of the committee's review and approval of Metro's FY 2022 capital budget. Slide 4 shows Metro's proposed 6-year capital improvement program, totaling $13.6 billion, and includes $1.2 billion of anticipated debt during this period. Slide 5, as the committee will recall, layers in available funding from local, state, and federal capital funding sources to determine available funding gap that needs to be supported by debt. And as the committee saw in March, the last row shows annual debt requirements through fiscal year 2027 in order to meet Metro's capital investment goals. Based on that analysis, this slide shows the amount authorized by the board to finance outstanding fiscal year 2021 and part of fiscal year 2022 approved capital projects, which is $874 million. In terms of market expectations, the slide shows that municipal yields, which are based on the 10-year treasuries, remain relatively low, despite recent bumps in the consumer price index. As we shared with the committee last time, Metro still expects the new bonds to price a few basis points off the 10-year MMD curve, given expected ratings. And as I noted earlier, the key terms and conditions for the bonds are consistent with the board's prior authorization, including the par amount, final maturity of 25 years, and the lien structure. The bonds will have level debt service with no capitalized interest. Staff has met with 3 rating agencies, one of whom has reaffirmed its AA rating on the bonds. And we are making good progress on the Green Bond ESG designation with certification expected hopefully later this week. In addition, the team selected for these bond issuance, the financial advisory team, as well as the underwriting team, have at least 30% minority participation. Metro's financial advisors has reaffirmed their recommendation for Metro to use a negotiated sales process for the bonds. They believe that Metro still needs to explain the credit based on the market response so far and continuing questions about ridership and revenues, even though this credit is not backed by Metro's operating revenue. This slide provides the timeline for finalizing due diligence and closing on the bonds. Assuming committee and board authorization, Metro will post the offering statement and engage in additional marketing efforts before pricing the bonds. With that, Mr. Chairman, staff recommends committee approval of the bond documents and authorization to issue the Series 2021A dedicated revenue bonds. And I'll be glad to respond to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Now we'll move to discussion. Before we begin, I'd like to put a motion on the floor. I move approval of this item. Could I get a second from a committee member?
Second, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chair Smedberg. Now we can begin discussion on this item. I'll start, but if board members have questions, please use the raise your hand feature and let me know if you'd like to speak, and then I'll go around. My first question would be for Mr. Anasiki in terms of the bond ratings and the outlook. Did you get a sense of how we're rated compared to other agencies across the nation and what the outlook for kind of the industry is right now in terms of the bond market?
Yes, Mr. Secretary. As I indicated, we met with 3 rating agencies, and one of them have reaffirmed its rating of AA on this rating, which is better than Metro's traditional rating. And we believe that that's good news in light of where the market is. We are still expecting the other 2 agencies to provide ratings early next week. With respect to where the market is, there's additional stability that we've seen in the market, except that in recent days, the consumer price index, as you notice, have gone up, and there's increasing fear that rates in the latter part of the year will go even higher. We believe that the timing remains okay for us to go, and that the ratings will not be impacted by what we've seen with respect to the pandemic.
Great, thank you. Let me just kind of turn and make sure there are no questions from members of the committee or other board members, as I'm not seeing any hands raised. Thank you, Dennis. It looks like you're going to get off the hook today.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
But thank you. If there are no questions, I'll close the discussion on this item and ask the board corporate secretary to administer a roll call vote.
Sure, and I'll note for the purposes of this discussion that Ms. Babers is not officially part of the committee. She'll be assigned to this committee at the board meeting, and so only 3 members will be voting today. So the roll call will be Vice Chair Slater.
Aye.
Mr. Smedberg.
Aye.
And Mr. Costa.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Now we'll move to the discussion. If board members have questions, we'll please use your raise your hand function, but we'll turn it over to General Manager Paul Wiedefeld for our service update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, what we wanted to do, obviously, we've been through a lot, and we wanted to update the board on where we are in our overall approach to the recovery plan, and also to bring to the board what we learned through both focus groups and surveys we've done as we start to think about the future, particularly the immediate future over the next year, and some of the things that the board may want to consider going forward. So again, this is a discussion piece. I thought it would be good to level set where we are in the service first, and then move into going forward what we start to see from our customers. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom Webster and also Lynn Bowersox. So Tom, if you could kick it off, please.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Secretary Slater and members of the committee. Just confirming that you can see the slides on the screen. Okay, great, thank you. And good morning. So my name is Tom Webster. I'm Executive Vice President for Strategy Planning and Program Management at Metro. So just to recap, Metro's pandemic recovery planning has focused on supporting the region's recovery.
Hi guys, I think we've lost the voice.
Tom, you went to mute, Tom. Tom, if you could unmute, please.
I apologize. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So I'll start this part again. So Metro's pandemic recovery plan has focused on supporting the region's recovery and planning for and providing service that protects both employees and customers, and is designed to provide service to stay ahead of demand as ridership returns. Metro's pandemic recovery plan has 5 phases, from crisis response at the beginning of the pandemic, to recovery and then resilience. We're now entering the recovery phase of the plan, with vaccines now becoming widely available. The region and jurisdictions are now increasingly lifting restrictions and moving to reopening and recovery. And of course, Metro is planning to support increased activity levels and travel across the system and across the region. And now with substantial federal relief funding for public transportation in place and the FY22 budget adopted, there's an opportunity to improve service in anticipation of increasing demand. In last month, the board approved the FY22 operating and capital budgets, and it includes the planned service levels described on this slide. Scheduled Metro rail service is approximately 80% of pre-pandemic service levels, and with the approved bus service changes to be implemented in June and September, Metrobus will be running approximately 85% of pre-pandemic service levels. So the goal of the approved Metrobus service changes that are going to take effect in June is to maximize coverage throughout the week, including evening hours, with some buses extended as late as 2 a.m., and to improve service on weekends. So in early June, many Metrobus customers will see service improvements, with service added to approximately 60 routes. About 36 routes will see service until about 2 a.m. Every day of the week. This will help provide a safe and reliable transportation option for customers who work and travel late at night. On another dozen routes, additional weekday coverage and frequency will be added, and combined with the bus service changes that were implemented in March, most Saturday and Sunday coverage across the system will now be restored. And then, of course, there's another approved set of Metrobus service improvements scheduled for this fall. As Metro and the region recover and the board considers options for restoring and improving bus and rail service, it's important to note, and just as a reminder, that developing and implementing new service plans takes about 3 months. The activities include coordination both internally at Metro and externally, service schedule development, completing the work schedule selection process for our operational employees, and of course, providing notice and service information to customers. I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Lynn Bowersox, to discuss customer research and stakeholder outreach. Lynn?
Thanks, Tom. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and board members. My name is Lynn Bowersox. I'm the Senior Vice President of Customer Service, Communications, and Marketing. And before I start this morning, I just want to add my personal welcome to Director Babers, with whom I had the pleasure of working many years ago at Amtrak, and we're glad to have you on board. This is a summary today of research that we conducted in the early April timeframe with people throughout the transit zone. Our goal was to learn when our customers will be returning to workplaces, the purpose of other trips they're making on Metro, and any barriers there may be remaining for them in their decision to ride. We randomly surveyed both bus and rail passengers, and including those who were only riding prior to the pandemic, as well as those who are currently riding. We also conducted focus groups very recently. In fact, I personally listened to our customers over 2 nights, 2 bus focus groups and 2 rail focus groups, and they were equally diverse, as described on the slide, in terms of all categories of the demographics that we serve. And then in addition, the general manager hosted a meeting with business leaders, including those who are managing on behalf of multiple businesses through our local chamber organizations, as well as some developers who are really working very closely with us on transit-oriented development, and the hospitality industry, which, as you know, supports travel and tourism in the nation's capital. And so we wanted to learn what everybody expects and needs as the region reopens for business. We've been tracking unique bus ridership throughout the pandemic. And as you can see here, more people have returned to bus, nearly 3 in 5 customers. And like our rail customers, they are making fewer trips throughout the week. Bus customers are making more trips, however, to see friends, family, and to get to medical appointments as the region reopens. It seems very consistent with where we are generally. The most recent data tell us that 55% of the pre-pandemic bus trips were to or from work. And as a couple of weeks ago, that number was 42%, which is a bit of a nice trend that has climbed slowly but steadily since the beginning of the year. We know that our pre-pandemic customers are not traveling to work as often as they did because they are telecommuting. And we learned that even though their confidence in Metro remains high, those who do journey to work are driving more often. From all our research, we believe that that's a combination of both COVID safety concerns and the present lack of traffic congestion. So what about price? There's been a lot of buzz about whether fare changes could alter their choices, but there is absolutely no evidence in our research, either in the survey or in the focus groups, that price is a factor for our customers. In fact, 3/4 of our rail customers receive travel subsidies, make over $100,000 per household, or both. Price does not come up in any of the top 5 concerns, and where it comes up at all, it's in the bottom 3. I want you to know that I also explored that in the focus groups. And again, price is not a driving factor in decision making among our bus customers either. In the next slide, you're going to see what is the current COVID concern. It has shifted from surface cleaning to air filtration. And so for our customers, pandemic safe is now a combination of vaccination and being reassured about air filtration. It is something that they responded very strongly to in surveys, and then in focus groups articulated passionately. They're worried not only for themselves, but for their children, who often travel with them to daycare or to school. And so, at a certain age, they are not able to be vaccinated. And so the air filtration becomes much more important for parents as we listen to our customers. As you can see in this slide, we wanted to take this opportunity to just remind our passengers and the board that Metro Rail cars complete a full air change approximately every 3 minutes. And we're in the process of upgrading MERV filters and testing even newer, higher-end MERV filters, both on board trains and buses, as well as in our facilities. So with that as a backdrop, interestingly, all of our focus group participants were partially or fully vaccinated, confirming what we've seen in our surveys, that 95% of our customers intended to get vaccinated. So listening to people who were either on their first or second shot was very helpful. Based on what they've told us through all of these channels, by the end of this calendar year, nearly half expect to return to rail for some journey to work trips, but they expect to make fewer trips than they used to because of continuing telework. These survey results basically extrapolate to a loss of about 175,000 work trips per weekday due to the long-term increase in telework. Again, this is all subject to change as we come out of the pandemic and we transition and people's opinions and behaviors change, but that's the best information we have today. On the next slide, you'll see that further to the point, you can see that the majority of our riders were not teleworking prior to the pandemic. And while that's changed drastically, The experience has also been generally positive, and now all want to continue teleworking some number of days per week. That means that even if some traffic congestion returns and we earn our riders business with safe and reliable service, there will be fewer trips overall available in terms of the entire travel market on all modes. So we could see our weekday ridership shrink by as much as 25 to 50% in certain hours. On the next slide, you'll see that the business community leadership that we talked to told us that they found our research spot on. It's exactly tracking with what they're hearing from employers and retailers and others who depend on transit both for employees and customer travel. They believe that the peaks are certainly changing from what we knew historically, and they are asking for more frequent all-day rail and bus service for their employees and for their customers. They, to be clear, do not want to see the peak frequencies decrease. They want to see the off-peak frequencies increase. Tourism and hospitality are pushing very strongly for a reopening, and I think we begin to see that with announcements just this week from our elected officials in the jurisdictions that we serve. And that is, according to our customers and our business leaders, going to drive what they think of as fall returns to certain activities, and everybody is keying in on post-Labor Day as the beginning of that fall period. And then lastly, the business leaders told us that we simply can't communicate enough about what we are doing to keep Metro safe from the pandemic, as well as what services we are offering. And in fact, they asked us specifically if we could put in a good word with the governors and the mayor to endorse riding Metro when they feel it's safe to do so. So overall, some takeaways from this. I think that the best way for me to give the board a sense of what our customers want going forward is to quote a woman in our focus groups last week who rides both bus and rail. And she said that if I come on to the system and I have to wait 20 to 25 minutes for either a bus or a train, I'm going to call Uber. It needs to be no longer than a 5 or 6 minute wait for me to get where I need to go. She was representative of a lot of what we've been hearing. And we know that winning back the customers that we were serving before the pandemic is a lot easier than winning new riders. But all of them need us to meet their new needs. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Tom so we can talk about how we might consider doing that going forward. And I'll be available for questions, I think, when we're at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. So given these trends and expectations, peak period ridership is unlikely to recover right away with that growth in remote and telework and more office employees expected to have split work weeks and potentially different reporting times. Overall, regional trip volumes and travel patterns are obviously uncertain and challenging to predict. And while a strong economic recovery is expected, we could see more work and non-work trips taken throughout the day, all days of the week. We're also seeing continued development around Metro stations. Just one example pictured in the top right of this slide, a new hospital facility is opening next month next to our Largo Metro Rail station in Prince George's County. So these trends and expectations for when people are likely to travel are an important consideration as Metro and the board develop plans for service. And looking at when people in the region made trips on all travel modes pre-pandemic, there's a lot of travel activity in the region throughout the day, and especially between the core hours of 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. So the customer research and the stakeholder outreach and the patterns suggest that Metro should look to restore and improve service throughout those core hours of the day and all days of the week. And just as another point of information, data we're seeing from the ride-hailing companies like Uber and Lyft show a similar travel pattern, with those companies serving a significant number of trips through the midday and the evening, not just during the peak periods. And then including after transit traditionally begins ramping down service in the evening. In terms of looking ahead and next steps, and to the beginning of our next fiscal year in July, our next steps are, of course, to implement the bus service changes approved in the FY22 budget for staff and our management team to support the board's consideration of potential service and fare options to support the region's recovery. And then to continue to gather, importantly, customer feedback and input, consult and coordinate with our stakeholders and jurisdictions. And with that, Secretary Slater, that concludes our presentation, and I'm happy to support your discussion or answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Great. Thank you both for that great presentation. A lot of really good information here. You know, Mike, let me kind of start. You know, we're moving to the discussion. I'm going to go around the board just to make sure everybody has an opportunity to ask any questions, because it's a lot of information there. But let me kind of start on myself. I'm thinking more about the kind of the overcrowding component, the service versus demand. Can you talk a little bit about kind of where we are in terms of, you know, service level, where we're seeing our demand versus where we're programming our service levels kind of pre-pandemic? Just thinking about whether we're over-programming a little bit to make sure that we don't have a lot of overcrowding issues, those types of things, as initially we're really going to be still very much in the recovery phase of this pandemic. And I just want to think about over-programming versus programming exactly to where service might be.
So, appreciate the question, Secretary Slater. I think part of the feature of the planning we've been doing and the service we've been deploying is to try to stay ahead of that crowding. And of course, that's not perfect. We don't know where crowding is going to be at every moment of every day. But to restore service and to provide service in the places where we're seeing demand emerging and those trends. So that's been particularly important on the bus side, as that's where most riders have been, and anticipating, you know, times of day and frequency requirements to meet those capacity needs. I think generally so far, with obvious exceptions here and there, we've been able to stay ahead of extremely crowded conditions on both bus and rail. But that's going to continue to be an issue. I think that we have to monitor and particularly going into the fall, as ridership may begin to increase.
Great, thank you. Let me now go around the committee, see if there are any questions. Starting with Mr. Costa.
Yes, I do. Thank you. Really informative presentation. Thanks so much. I guess my question is about input from the federal community. There's been a lot of discussion about input from the business community. Makes good sense, and a couple of citations from specific agencies regarding their telework posture, I suppose. But if we talk to the central management agencies of the federal government, the Office of Personnel Management and the General Services Administration, because both agencies are issuing back to work guidance as we speak. So it'd be good to get pretty specific information on what you're hearing from those central management agencies.
Sure, Mr. Costa, of course. We did invite them to this meeting April 27th. They were in the process of developing that guidance that you just mentioned, and so they didn't feel that they were ready to do that, but will come the next time. The issue, as we understood it up and through present survey data, is that, and you'll see if you look in the appendix that was provided, all of the departments of the federal government that are represented in our survey respondents, right? So when they took the survey, they listed, I work at DOT, I work at the Department of Agriculture, I work at, and so on. You'll see that most, including the Pentagon and some of the bigger offices that we serve, were represented in the survey. And they uniformly said that telework is going to continue to be permitted at some level. They just weren't clear about how many days a week that was. And we're waiting for more instruction about what the balance would be, but it looked to our customers like it was going to be some sort of a hybrid model going forward. And so, again, that takes you from being a 3 or 4 day a week in the office worker to being a 2 or 3 day a week in the office worker, which takes you from being a 6 to 8 trip a week person on our system to a 4 trip a week person on our system potentially. And that tracks, right, with some of what we've gotten. But until the OPM tells us exactly what the guidance is going to be, that's the best we've got.
So my recommendation is actually be fairly aggressive about asking OPM and GSA because of the impact of the federal workforce on the system. I believe if we wait for that to happen, well, it would be better actually to push the issue with those central management agencies to get information. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. Chair Smedberg?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Webster, about the trend or the concern about off-peak. Traditionally, we've obviously had a great deal of focus on, the transit commuters, the tradition, the 9 to 5, getting people back and forth to work. I mean, that's been the sort of the bread and butter of WMATA and, informed a lot of our decisions. But moving forward, people are living differently. Younger people are viewing transit differently. How is that off-peak demand potentially going to change how we operate? And how long is it going to take us to adjust to that?
So I think very good points, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate the question. The travel has been changing for some time, pre-pandemic, and I think we learned from the bus transformation project that there's significant demand in what are our traditional off-peak periods, and that both in our region and across the country, agencies are looking at sort of standardizing service throughout the course of the day and on weekends, and then providing additional service during those extra high demand periods that we traditionally call their peak. So it's almost like a flip in how we think about it. Of course, that's a significant change in Metro's model, as you point out. We, particularly on Metro Rail, we've been focused on the peak and the peak of service. So it's going to take some work and some planning and of course some service development to get there. But there's certainly an opportunity that we're seeing through this customer research and I think through some of the evaluations and studies we've done over the past few years.
And Mr. Webster, what about development in and around metro stations? I mean, there was clearly a trend in that direction leading up to the pandemic. I assume, well, I know it's still continuing in some areas, particularly around, the Amazon development and along the new Silver Line Phase 2. But what about other parts of the system? I mean, that is also an opportunity to increase ridership because, and that is primarily happening along the rail lines. And as we know, the rail fares and income, pay the bills. So how are we handling that aspect of things moving forward?
I think that's a great point, and you're right. There is development still happening all across the region. I just used that one example of the hospital in Prince George's, but Amazon and elsewhere in the system. Just one other factor here is, Metro Rail has provided a lot of service in both directions, of course, and the more development happens in places where there can be reverse commutes and reverse travel, in places like New Carrollton or further out into the system, we're taking advantage of the capacity that we already have. So encouraging that type of development will drive ridership and improve the system.
Yeah. And to you and Ms. Bowersox both, I think, beyond what Mr. Costa said about the federal government, I think we really also need to coordinate with the 3 states, and making sure, working with people like Secretary Slater, Secretary Valentine, Ms. Babers, to make sure that, we are really enforcing any kind of messages or communication or things that they're doing with major employers and others, in the region to, make sure people don't get back in their cars, that they do get on transit, and communicating that we are, safe, reliable, and clean, I guess, is another word we have to use to our adjectives there. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Babers, welcome.
Thank you. And it's good to see you, Tom and Lynn. It's good to see you again. So I do have a question as it relates to what type of marketing plan do you all plan to roll out? Because in the district, we are working on our marketing plan for trying to get people to return back to work and trying to revitalize the economy. And one of the things that we did bring up was transportation in WMATA, and we wondered what type of communication plan you all were going to have to convince people to come back to both rail and bus. So could you, talk a little bit more about that?
Of course. So we've had a campaign in market called Doing Our Part, and perhaps you've seen some of those messages, really focused on our essential workforce and how those folks have been preparing trains and buses to be safe during the pandemic, and also featuring some of the essential workers who've continued to ride throughout the pandemic safely, mask compliant, and so on. In one ad, there's a nurse. In one ad, there's a volunteer at a food pantry, all who have continued to work throughout this period on behalf of the communities that we serve. We are rolling out at the end of this month a second wave of communications. We call it Doing Our Part 2. We'll focus on other steps that we've taken, more people returning, air filtration, and the concerns that you heard about today. But what we're really working on in terms of your question is a Win Back Riders campaign that we would launch in the Labor Day timeframe, when we expect that there is going to be more of a restart to normalcy, and we will have the opportunity to really get a message that incents people to try Metro again as they come back to the workplace. And so we're putting those plans together now. We'd be happy to work with the district and the other jurisdictions to leverage all of our assets together on that. As you know, our customers benefit greatly from in-system messages that they see, as well as the social media and traditional media channels that we use. So we have a lot of reach through social media. We have as many followers in some instances as some of the local television stations. And so we'd be happy to work with you on any joint messages that we could do. But that's being prepared for the Labor Day period.
Okay, great. And just to comment, the city would, of course, welcome working with WMATA. It was in your presentation that if they could, city officials could amplify the message. So when you put out your plans, we'll definitely try to integrate that into comments by the mayor and also by the council chair.
Thank you. And in fact, one of the suggestions that's been made to us, and this builds on something that Director Gideby Jenkins asked us to do during the budget process, is to produce toolkits that the jurisdictions can use, and those toolkits will be part of the Win Back Riders campaign too. So you'll have camera ready and social media ready content, things ready to go that will help you in amplifying that message. Thank you for your offer.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ms. Babers. Mr. Goldman?
Thank you, Mr. Slater. Thank you, Lynn, and thank you, Tom, for your presentations. I do want to just focus a little bit on the survey of ridership that Lynn presented and just ask you some questions there. So just starting at slide 8, where you sort of set this up, just to get the context of this. In the random survey, how was the survey conducted? Is this virtual telephone interview, or did you do this online, or did you do it by old mail, sending people a questionnaire and having them fill it out and send it back? You know, what was the modality for the random survey to start with?
So the methodology gave our customers an option of either conducting the survey by phone or online. People could use the phone if they chose to take the survey in other than English. That allowed a translation service to be offered to them.
So you actually had one-on-one conversations with people over the phone as an option?
Yes.
Okay. Now turning to the next one, slide number 9, where you report that 3 in 5 of the pre-pandemic bus customers returned to riding. What can you tell us about the other 2 in 5 who didn't? Are they doing remote work? Are they unemployed? Are they afraid to travel because of COVID? What's their situation?
All of the above. Some people are working remotely. Some people are driving or taking other methods, biking, walking, etc., that they feel are more COVID safe. And we did see among bus customers a spike in unemployment last year. It leveled out at the end of the year, and that also affected ridership and trips.
Any breakdown? What was sort of the largest component of that 40% group that aren't coming back to bus riding?
I'd have to get back to you on that, Mr. Goldman. I don't have that number memorized, but I'm sure we can break that out in our tabs for you.
Do you have any impression of what that was? You know, how much of it were health concerns? How much of it were remote work? How much of people were just unemployed? Any sense of where that, where that group is?
So the unemployment rate in the survey was, I think, at its highest, about 12%, if that gives you a flavor. And then the rest is going to be a breakdown between the other 2 categories that you mentioned.
All right. Now, turning just to your next one, this is the slide that reads at the top, Metro Rail expected changes this year. And on your left-hand side under findings, you say price is not a primary barrier. And so my question, since I've been one of the advocates of kind of some price breaks for Metro Rail riders to encourage them to come back, is that a question that was actually asked of the people in the random survey? With that language, is price a barrier to your return?
Yes, we asked the question in a couple of different ways in the survey and in the focus group. So we asked if is price a concern? If the price were different, would that affect your choice? And a couple of other iterations. The focus group discussion was interesting because, again,
I'm sorry, I don't want to get to. I just want to get to the survey first, and then we'll go to the focus.
Oh, sure.
Group. So, just in the survey, what was the breakdown of the riders? Did you have numerical numbers to reach the conclusion that price is not a primary barrier?
Yes. Yeah, so I can give you those numbers in a follow-up memo. I just don't have them.
Well, I mean, was it a majority or 40% or 80%? I'm just trying to get a sense of whether it's
an overwhelming majority.
Okay. And then on the right-hand side, you say 3 in 4 rail customers receive travel subsidies or where they earn over 100,000 or both. So of that 75% that are receiving either travel subsidies or earn over 100,000, again, what's the percentage of that that's getting travel subsidies? Is it 70% getting travel subsidies, or is it down to 10 or 20%? How, so you mix these 2 groups together in a bag here to make 75% travel subsidies and earning over 100,000. Can you break that down a little more granularly and tell us which are the travel subsidy parts people.
Sure, I will get back to you as a follow-up matter and give you those precise numbers.
Okay, and then when you say receive travel subsidies, what is the definition of a travel subsidy?
So in most instances, it is smart benefits or similar subsidies that are provided through smart benefits. Is of course the federal workforce predominantly receives smart benefits in the sense of support for their travel requirements. WageWorks is another provider through the private sector, typically and some public sector, of travel benefits to customers. And the travel subsidy is a federal program, and such a high percentage of our customers benefit from federal programs, our federal workforce, or contractors related to federal workforce who follow those policies, et cetera. So there's a lot of travel subsidy here that you wouldn't find in transit properties in other cities across the country, for example.
So, but when you use travel subsidies, are you just referring to the travel program, the federal travel program, or is any travel subsidy included in the rubric travel subsidies when you got responses from the riders?
Yes, any travel subsidy.
So if someone was getting $1 a day from an employer, that would be considered a travel subsidy program?
It would, but I'm unaware of programs that offer that little.
Well, give us a description then of, so I have a sense of what this term is. You know, what's sort of the kind of average travel subsidy program or the predominant travel subsidy program that you're familiar with?
So I think that the majority of our customers really do benefit from smart benefits sort of travel subsidy programs, and it basically gives them on a regular commuting pattern free travel on Metro over a month's period.
And that's free travel. Is that based on what their trip cost is? Is it free travel if someone's living in the district and just commuting from, let's say, Upper 14th Street into the Federal Triangle Core, as opposed to someone who's coming in from Shady Grove and commuting by bus and train to the Pentagon? Is it the same level of travel benefits that he gets from the federal government?
So you touched on, as an example, my own commute, which is Shady Grove to downtown, and the customers that I know on that commute who are benefiting from smart benefits get essentially free commute to work travel every month. That's not beyond commute to work, but just commute travel every month is pretty much covered for them.
Thank you. A couple more questions. Just on slide 12, you say on the finding side, this is still yours, right? Or is this now Tom's? Yeah, this is still yours. So you say by year's end, which I assume you're talking about fiscal year, so it's June 2022, is that correct?
No, I actually mean calendar.
Calendar
21. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So by the end of this year, you're saying that recovery of Metro Rail commuters is 42%. Now, does that mean that we're revising our forecast? Because in the budget that we just approved, we were forecasting Metro Rail riders coming back at about 14 or 15% in the first quarter, and maybe going up to about 20% by the second quarter, and capping out at 34% by June of next year, the end of the fiscal year. So
I'm gonna answer your question in combination with my colleague Tom Webster, but no, it doesn't change it, because what I'm talking about is unique riders, and the budget is based on trip making and revenue projection.
Okay, so while if 42% of commuters may be coming back, they're not really riding in a pattern where they would be resulting in 42% of Metro Rail riders coming back. So we would not be at 42% of Metro Rail riders at pre-COVID levels.
So you would be at 42% of Metro Rail riders at pre-COVID levels, but they would make fewer trips over the span of a week.
Fewer, got it. Okay. I think the final question I have is for Mr. Webster, Tom, I think you're in charge of slide 16, current situation and outlook. Is that yours?
Sure, yes.
Okay, so in the first bullet, you go peak period ridership is unlikely to recover right away. And I recognize right away is not a very scientific term, but does right away mean today, May, June 2021, or are you talking by some broader period in terms of right away?
Mr. Goldman, it is intentionally not specific. We don't know when peak period ridership will return to pre-pandemic levels. We're expecting, based on this research and based on what we're hearing and seeing, that there will be a gradual recovery of peak period ridership, but that ridership all day during core hours and on weekends will likely outpace ridership growth, will likely outpace that growth in the peak periods because of continued remote work, continued split shifts, continued different reporting times, those sorts of things. So we're not at a point here where we can project for financial purposes or for budget purposes exactly when we expect to see different levels of ridership during the peak period. But we do expect some recovery over a period of time.
All right. So this slide and your forecast generally does not have a date in mind when we may see peak period ridership return to pre-COVID levels or some larger percentage of pre-COVID levels than projected in the budget.
We're anticipating that ridership will begin to grow more now, and that based on, again, what we're seeing, what we're hearing, that Labor Day and the start of schools in the fall, and that is on people's minds as a period of time when both peak and our traditional off-peak period ridership will see significant growth, but that remains to be seen, difficult to predict at this point.
What I'm just trying to pin down is whether the projections of ridership and revenue that are in the budget of peaking at about 34% by June of next year, if that's still staff's projection of where we will be in June or next year, or whether based on this research you're changing and have a more optimistic cast.
At this point, Mr. Goldman, I appreciate the question. It's an important one. We are not at a point where we're changing the projections for budget purposes. What we've committed and the board discussed in adopting the budget is we're going to need to revisit those projections throughout the year, quarterly or at some other interval, as we see what's actually happening in the service and in the region.
And just for the context of the question, when you refer to peak periods, you're referring to what were the traditional pre-COVID peak periods of 7 to 9 in the morning and 5 to 7 in the evening? Is that
generally? Yes.
Generally. Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for the opportunity to ask those questions.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Mr. Rouse?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this first one could really go to either Lynn or Tom. Yeah, looking at what you presented here, what I didn't really see are the really traditional decision-making factors. The combination of things like travel time, convenience, and cost when you compare it to other options. Could you talk about that? Was that looked into, or is that another set of data that you're looking at? Because really, when we think about the peak of the peak ridership that was driving the revenue for the rail side, most of those riders are longer route riders who look at those issues when they make the decision whether or not they're just going to drive in for the day and park because it might be cheaper for now or free parking, or go through the process of getting on the metro and riding in from there.
So I want to take a shot at that, and then maybe Tom wants to add. But convenience is king for our customers. Trip time is very, very meaningful. And when they talk about reliability and wait times for buses and trains, that's also a factor with respect to convenience and overall travel time. The challenge of the marketplace right now is that without the normal traffic that people are accustomed to pre-pandemic, the choice to drive is easier because the trip time is faster without, the hiccups of normal traffic congestion. And so if you ask folks today what their choices are, their trip time choice is faster because of the lack of traffic. If you ask them what was faster pre-pandemic, it's one of the drivers that put them on Metro in the first place. So the decision going forward, if they see the traffic resume, is going to be Metro has the more advantageous trip time. It is one of our competitive advantages. The problem is that they don't see it today, so it's a hard choice to make. And it's one of the reasons why today there may be other modes that are preferred. But Tom, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. I think you captured it well. I think the one thing I would add is there are just in terms of equity and thinking about our whole ridership base, there are a lot of people who are dependent on our service, and they too are focused on frequency, reliability, on-time performance, their total travel time, as they're considering their options, and it's a real lifestyle impact as well. So I think as we look forward to planning for future service changes, that's something that's important to keep in mind too for existing customers and those who may ride more into the future here.
Okay, and I think that's an important point, because the context of where we're taking the survey and what the options are today versus what the system was built to do, at least for the rail side primarily, right? Move people in large numbers. They're really two different worlds when the overall transportation network is below capacity, right? Because you don't see the traditional travel times that we were associated with before that, right? And it's really hard for a system of this size to be competitive on a high frequency basis when you don't have other factors, driving travel time in the area. And so I think we need to keep that in the discussion and look at other data. I mean, you had some pretty good data there for the inclusion of the Uber and ride hailing services. I thought that was a good look at it. Of course, that was past data, right? So what are the current trends, and how does that compare to other data like overall travel time? I don't know what else is out there in terms of just availability for the 66 or other highways or ways or other data that can give us some sense of what the trends are day to day, week to week, to try to figure out where those, to your point, what the travel trends are and where are those time periods where Metro has a competitive advantage coming back in the next several months versus what it is right now or what it has been for the past several months. I think on the point of winning back riders, I've always looked at the perspective as we should never ignore the opportunity to win new riders, right? Certainly, our existing riders are comfortable with us, and getting them back is a different task than winning people that are not familiar with the system at all. But there's a lot of data that you showed there that says that may not be possible for some of those riders, right? Especially with expanded telework. They may come back, to your point, but it's not going to be, you're not going to win them back every day because they just don't have to come back every day. They have other options now. And again, if travel time and other convenience factors aren't driving their decision, then they're going to choose other modes. So looking at other ridership is still important. Who else is out there? What are the obstacles that they've perceived for not using the system? The chair, Paul made a point here about expansion of new developments and trying to win those riders. Where are they going? What opportunities can we have there? Continuing to expand, more innovative arrangements with other organizations for tourism or other things, and trying to find other ways that we can, raise the level of awareness of Metro and its, and how it can be used. I think that's still important. I think we need to do that. And I think a lot of the data you showed supports that. You look at, again, off-peak travel times, who's using the system. There's probably a lot more focus that needs to go on how we can continue to expand our ridership base to begin with, and what that role will play in the future. So I think those were my major 2 points there. And I think a big part of it is things like advertising, right? Are people even aware of what the options are? And yeah, exploring other opportunities for what are those, again, barriers for people getting on the system, and making sure if we do anything to adjust that people know that we've made those changes, and get them to be aware of the system and use it more often. And certainly you have a captured basis when you advertise within the system, but that's not the people we need to be advertising to, right? It's the people who aren't using the system.
Absolutely, and I would just add that, Mr. House, that's well said, and you know, we have this very exciting opportunity coming online hopefully next year with Dulles International Airport, and business travel and international visitors coming through there and being new to the system, and I think that we have a chance to earn new business every day with visitors to the nation's capital, and so we will stay focused on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Rouse. Mr. Letourneau?
I'm trying again. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Working again? Okay. Takeaway wise, what came across to me in the survey, and just to very, very quickly synopsize, service matters more than fare. So we don't really seem to have a fare problem. And so if the board is looking to sort of do things to get us into a better position, we should be looking more at our service than we should be worrying about fare subsidies and discounts and things like that. Is that a fair statement?
It is. I mean, there are always price sensitive customers, and I don't want to discount that. But largely, the service is going to be the driver, even for the fare sensitive customer.
Okay, so getting to service then, one of the questions that I had was we seem to kind of be leaving it open in terms of what our level of service is going to be for September, based on what the ridership need will be. However, I know from previous discussions that there is a significant lead time that we need in order to be able to adjust service. Typically, I would guess somewhere in the neighborhood of about a month and a half when you get into the bidding process and things like that. So if we think there's going to be a huge uptick in demand around Labor Day, which is sort of what things are kind of shaping up to look like, at least a uptick, then at what point are we evaluating and making that decision that we need to add more service for Labor Day? When does that need to have been decided by?
So thank you for the question, Mr. Letourneau. The lead time is about 3 months. So
3 months.
Essentially to be ready in September, it's at the beginning of September, it's June.
So when you say we're going to evaluate ridership and then make adjustments, what does that mean exactly for that September timeframe? It would be now that we have to be evaluating ridership.
That's right.
So is it our expectation that we're going to get back to some sort of pre-pandemic level of service for Labor Day then?
Well, I want to just jump in and be clear. We have enough service on the rail side now to meet what we expect to see on Labor Day.
Okay.
The demand side where we have some challenges is on the bus service, and there is more bus service rolling out in June in order to meet that demand. And so I think for Labor Day, the service is sufficient to meet the demand that we're projecting and to provide, where we can, social distancing, although that's not every bus and every rail car, for Labor Day. I think the bigger challenge is thinking about when we are reaching capacity constraints in the beginning of the new year, and what we want to do for the January through June timeframe of this fiscal year.
Okay. is there anything we can extrapolate just over the last few weeks, just even looking at Smart Trips data as people have been getting vaccinated? You know, has there been sort of a acceleration of the uptick that would lead us to believe as the region becomes more and more vaccinated, we're going to continue to see something at that pace?
We're seeing it, but it is, I think it's very, very early data. It seems to directionally that it looks that way. We just don't have a lot of certainty yet.
Okay. And then maybe the last question. So the other side of all this is that there's a cost associated with providing the service. And this presentation didn't get into, you know, I mean, Mr. Goldman was asking about our budget and whether sort of things are still lining up. But what's in the back of my mind is that, you know, we have essentially a surplus of federal funds that we didn't need to apply to fiscal year 22 that we potentially will need for fiscal year 23. So as we sort of continue to look at this, I think it would be helpful for us to kind of understand what our sort of burn rates are for these different policy options. Now, I know the board's going to have a discussion about fares in general, and I'm not sure how that nets out, because I think some of the things that we're looking at, we hope will have a positive impact on revenue, not just a negative one. But service increases have the potential to really drain revenue or drain our overall balance. So we have to know kind of what we need to have for 23 available to plug a hole, since I don't think we're going to get more federal money. And then we need to know sort of what the implications of adding back service at a certain rate is to that. So I don't know, you're welcome to comment on that now, but I'm also just kind of be looking for that sort of analysis going forward. You know, understanding that we may never have a return to where the demand was, or at least not for many years, and so we probably don't need to be back to exactly where we were. But at what point are we jeopardizing our ability to plug our potential revenue hole for 23 and beyond?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Letourneau. I think that is absolutely critical part of this discussion. I think in future sessions, we'll bring in those budget considerations and some of the long-term financial implications.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Letourneau. Ms. Gideby-Jenkins?
One, I just want to start by thanking you both for just being forward-leaning and trying to get ahead of understanding the customers and kind of how we should be thinking about some of these pieces. The data set is very helpful, and I think it actually just aligns with where transit agencies across the country are really at as it relates to service. I think slide 16 that talks about the fact that 80% of total regional trips are actually non-work. And I think for a very long time, we've consistently focused just on commuters. And so it is just like 2020 just offered greater clarity and vision for what we might have been missing. To Devin's point, the reality is we've had riders who've been using this system that we've been missing. And the thought process that 80% of them were not the commuters that we've spent the majority of our focus on for decades, I think really speaks to that reality. So I'm encouraged by us really thinking about how we provide different service options as part of this. The other pieces I think that we're not necessarily fully accounting for in this off-peak is that in this new era of COVID, there'll be people that are coming in at different times just because of the reality around childcare and some of these other pieces. So you will still have people who are working, but they're not going to be coming in at 9, right? The 9 to 5 schedule is going to be shifting. And I think one of the things that we saw through the summertime was that there was a staggered entry, even for those who were working, that gave you a different option and composition. So I hope that we will also hold that in our hearts as we're thinking about some of the services that we're going to be offering throughout the day, because even the workers will be shifting their focus, not just from telework, but even just how they're doing staggered shifts. My questions are actually going to be based closer to Michael Goldman, as you will imagine, on the survey piece, Lynn. So so there was a couple of pieces in the business, in the employer section, and reading through some of the folks who were identified, they were all large businesses in my mind, and or federal or public agencies that seem to have like 500 plus. Is there a targeted universe for some of the small businesses, bids? Because I think those were the folks who we really heard from during the pandemic, where they literally were emailing both of us saying they have 5 folks, they need Metro to stay. And I'm not really seeing them reflected in this kind of employer list. So are you going to go back out and just have and they, even setting up the meetings with them, it was hard because they're working during the time that we're doing our surveys. So is there going to be some sort of targeted outreach? Because I feel like that's the group that really is depending on Metro right now to work for us, but we need to have in this kind of demographic survey.
Yeah, so I think that's right. One of the things that is clear to us is that some of the outreach that we did for the budget period needs to continue. A random survey in order to have integrity has to be random, right? However, targeted outreach is targeted outreach, and so we do need to continue that. To your point, we'll continue that. I think that one of the things that we heard from the business leaders, especially when I think about Destination DC and Elliott Ferguson participating, was about the hotel workers, about the restaurant workers, and about the convention workers and people who are really depending on business conferences and meetings and conventions and things returning in the fall and spring timeframe when capacity limits grow. And he did speak about the times of day when people need bus service in particular. And so we are hearing through some of those larger groups about the smaller needs of both essential workers and smaller businesses that serve those industries. So I don't want to say that they're entirely left out, but again, a random sample is a random sample. So on the survey side, you get what you get in there. And so we need to keep doing the outreach to make sure those voices get heard.
Okay. Well, then to the diversity of the survey and just the voices, I mean, hearing the notion that price isn't a concern when we for years heard the penalty piece for transfer discounts between bus and rail consistently. We didn't need this survey to tell us that. They've been coming to meetings. They've brought it up every time they've had an opportunity to tell us. That's the piece where I'm feeling a little sensitive to the data, because I think to Matt's summary or summarization that it's all about service, that service is a priority, but fare, is not a key piece. I think I'm not sure that that's fully, because this sampling, even the thought process of the sampling of saying the majority of those sampling folks even had the COVID pieces, we know that minority groups are underrepresented. We know that even when we did all that robust outreach, we still were like, it just didn't get there. So and those who, they also represent a lower population. So like the data is very skewed in my mind a little bit, but I still think it tells a powerful story. So I just want to make sure that there's a way that you are going to do a little bit more of that targeted outreach, understanding that the sampling piece is what it is. And so we're going to miss some key people. But as it relates to fare, those are the most key people who would be impacted by the discussion around fare.
Absolutely.
So how do you want to count that?
I just want to echo what you're saying, and to tell you that even when I find a result that says 8 out of 10 people think this, there's still 2 out of 10 that don't. And so they matter, and we have to be mindful of that. I did listen to the focus groups for a reason. I wanted to see if we had anyone in the focus groups who was unemployed. And I want you to know that we did have people who were laid off as a result of the pandemic. And we're really struggling. So even though they may be underrepresented in the survey, we made a special effort to include them in the focus groups so that we could hear their voices. So it may not show up in the numbers, but it shows up in the qualitative research that we do. And we are listening. But I will tell you that even for the gentleman that I remember most vividly who had lost his job, who was a healthcare worker, believe it or not, who had lost his job because his office closed, who was trying to think about how to support his family, and commuted from my neighborhood downtown previously. that he was saying that price was not an option was not a barrier for him, because if he got another job that Metro also served that destination, he would get right back on that train and would spend what he needed to spend to get to that job. So again, you know, the threshold for this price barrier depends very much on where people are in their lives, and the pandemic has changed that for a lot of people.
Okay. I know we've had a lot more questions, so I'll let the rest of mine just kind of echo what has happened. Thank you guys for being proactive and getting this to us.
Thank you so much, Mr. Webster, Ms. Bowersox, and members of the board for the great questions. If there are no more questions, I'll close the discussion item on this agenda item. Before I wrap up this committee meeting, I do want to go back to Mr. Anasiki for one moment, just to provide a little bit of clarity on a change that was made to the bond material in just last week. So just to make sure we're fully transparent, the materials presented were absolutely correct. It's just some clarity to point out some change. Mr. Anasiki?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When the documents were shared with the jurisdictions, the district pointed out that the section describing the district's legislation indicated that there was a 3% escalation built into the legislation, even though that the 3% did not apply to their contribution to WMATA. The language was accurate, but they felt that it could give a wrong impression that there was an additional escalation built into that, and so that was the modification that was made to the POS.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Anasiki. I see Ms. Gilby Jenkins, so I'm sure she was involved in that one as well, just to make sure.
You're absolutely right.
Well, thank you all. With no further business to come before this committee, we stand adjourned, and we'll begin the board meeting momentarily.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Paul Smedberg, Chair of the WMATA Board, and I want to welcome you to the board's May 13th, 2021 meeting. Thank you all for being here. I'll now ask the board corporate secretary, Ms. Ellison, to call the roll. Ms. Ellison.
Thank you. Chair Smedberg?
Present.
Vice Chair Gideby Jenkins?
Present.
Vice Chair Goldman?
Present.
Alternate Director Costa?
Present.
Director Letourneau?
Present.
Director Babers?
Present.
Director Slater?
Present.
Alternate Director Rouse?
Present.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. I'd like to move to approval of the agenda. If there are no objections, I'd like to consider the agenda approved as presented with two changes. First, Secretary Slater will be delivering the Finance and Capital Committee report on behalf of Steve McMillan. And second, consent item D will be removed from the consent item for discussion. Are there any objections to the agenda with those changes? Hearing none, the agenda is approved as amended. Next, the approval of minutes. We have two sets of minutes for approval. First, the April 22nd, 2021 board meeting and the April 22nd, 2021 executive session. I'd like to consider those minutes approved as presented. Does anyone have any objections or comments or corrections to either of those sets of minutes? Hearing none, the minutes are approved as presented. Thank you. Next, we'll turn to our employee spotlight. And I'll ask Mr. Wiedefeld, the general manager, to introduce this morning's honorees. Mr. Wiedefeld.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This month's spotlight recognizes two power high voltage mechanics, Mr. Stanley Walker, who's been with Metro for nearly a decade, and Mr. Lee Alsuferi, who's worked there for 8 years. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Good, sir. Thank you. On April 27th, while enjoying their lunch break in Rockville, both men saw smoke coming from the top of a nearby high-rise apartment building. Without hesitation, they moved into action, crossing Rockville Pike and racing to the building. As they arrived, they noticed nobody was evacuating the building and they heard no alarms. Immediately, Mr. Alsaferi acted as a step stool. Thank you, Mr. Alsaferi. So Mr. Walker could climb a fence to reach the building entrance. Once there, he banged on a window and pointed up to alert the building's occupants of the smoke resulting from the fire. Soon after, the fire alarm began to ring and people started to evacuate the building. 30 Montgomery emergency vehicles and approximately 75 personnel responded to the fire, and smoke plume was visible almost 15 miles. Many people would have sat back and watched, but instead these men acted quickly and heroically. This was not their job, but they knew it was the right thing to do. Even more, they barely even mentioned this to anyone afterwards because they did not think of themselves as special, but we most certainly do. Please join me in applauding Mr. Alsaferi and Mr. Walker for their attentiveness and quick action that saved lives that day. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes my remarks.
Thank you.
Well, on behalf of the board, thank you both. I mean, that really could have turned into something much greater than it was, and you know, that cannot be overlooked. And so, thank you so much for doing what you both did. But I have to say, now I'm curious, Mr. Alsaferi. Tell me what it's like being the human stepladder.
I didn't mean to. I just tried to see something wrong. The right thing to do. I jumped to the action. That's all.
Well, I don't know about that, but I think you played a very important role that day.
Thank you.
All right. Does anyone else would like to make any comments?
I just want to echo my appreciation. You know, you all are ambassadors for Metro on and off work time. And so when you all kind of step up, even though you're thinking that it's a small piece, it is a reflection. Just like when we get bad news, it hurts all of us. You all doing some of this great work, not asked to, but because it's in your value statements of how you believe, you know, things should happen, kind of speaks to the overall representation of the staff that's within Metro. So I'm grateful that you all were willing to put yourselves at risk and also put your bodies in place to be able to support the region and also your neighbors more specifically that you were able to see. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for what you did, but thank you for what you do daily for us.
Thank you guys for recognizing us for this. Like he said, we just stepped into action. We didn't think it was a big deal. That's why we really didn't tell nobody. But we thank y'all for recognizing us, and we appreciate that.
Well, you're very humble because it was a big deal. It was a very significant incident, obviously, event. So thank you again, Mr. Wiedefeld.
Just again, thank you both, and be safe, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good day.
Okay, next we'll move on to public comment and advisory board reports. First, we'll hear from customers and stakeholders who submitted comments to the board. John, can we please begin?
Sure. Can you all see the public comment slides?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. We have about a dozen public comments, and so we'll be alternating on and off. The first comment is from Tiffany Brown, who is chair of ANC 7B02. She is writing today to request that the WMATA board reject the proposed budget plan that eliminates one-seat trips from Southeast to Northwest on the 30N and 30S buses. With the funding provided in the federal relief bill in March 2021, the WMATA staff has sent a revised draft FY22 budget to you all that reverses most of the dramatic spending cuts and service reductions WMATA initially put forward for public comment in January and February of 2021. Despite the pleas from ANC commissioners, community leaders, and residents, the WMATA staff is proposing to discontinue the 30S and 30N crosstown buses after June 30th, 2021, thereby eliminating one-seat trips from Southeast to Northwest. This change would require riders to transfer to another bus or Metro Rail if they want to travel across town, crossing the National Mall and continuing beyond a few blocks to the northwest or southeast. As the board will recall, in 2020, when the same proposal was made, dozens of people turned out for the hearings and submitted comments pleading to maintain that service, among the largest numbers of any route in the city. Many of the regular riders are still using Metrobus, but this year they are even busier and more challenged by the challenges of living and working during COVID-19. We cannot all make it to a virtual hearing to tell these stories, but the need is no less great this year. The arguments are compelling. This service is needed by many essential workers who work long hours and have very long commutes. When WMATA was first formed, the top officials of the transit agency and the district agreed that they would maintain crosstown bus service between Southeast and Northeast, even after Metrorail opened and some of the lines paralleled the bus routes or could be used as an alternative, because they believed that preserving the economical one-trip bus service was essential for maintaining connections among the neighborhoods and parts of the city. That commitment has served well for over 45 years and is just as important today as a matter of inclusion, connection, and equity. Ms. Brown's comments continue, but we've hit the 2-minute mark, so those are posted online if folks would like to read them. And then I'll turn to Ms. Evans for the next comment.
This comment is from Barbara Wood of Washington, D.C. I am a D.C. resident. I live in Ward 8. I use Metro for a means of transportation. I attend work-related information at the following location: 300 A Street Northeast, Capitol Hill. I have to walk from there 4 blocks to a bus stop. The blocks are very long in that area, and I am a senior citizen. Most times, by the time I reach the stop, I miss the bus and have to wait 30 minutes to 45 minutes for another one. I would like to know, if possible, could they place a stop a lot closer? Thank you for your time.
Our next comment is from John Nicholson from Fairfax County. This is my 3rd attempt to get action by WMATA to remove a potential biohazard on the site of the Franconia Springfield Power Substation. Twice before, I submitted feedback to the Metro Customer Relations email address, providing reference numbers, receiving only automated canned replies and then nothing. The issue is an overflowing Don's John's portable toilet on the substation at the end of the walking path from Franconia Road to the Metro station. The sewage in this toilet has been full to overflowing for months and months, and neither the vendor nor Metro, in charge of the vendor, has taken any action to remove the biohazard. Can you not direct your vendors to clean up this hazard? I am so frustrated with being ignored that my next correspondence will be to my congressman. Please take action. Thank you.
This is from Timothy Smalls of Fairfax County, Virginia. I have 2 concerns. Number 1, your website is in dire need of update with regard to the disabled. When I moved here last week, I came down on my prosthetic leg via 2 buses and 2 trains from Fairfax County to supposedly complete the procedure for reduced fare card for under age 66, based on the clearly delineated website instructions, only to find your office no longer handles the forms in person. The pandemic has been in effect for 14 months. I think you've had enough time to update your site accordingly. Number 2, how can the nation's capital be insensitive to the needs of seniors and the disabled who visit the area by not accepting presentation of the red, white, and blue Medicare card in conjunction with government-issued photo ID as proof of disability? Those cards are accepted as sufficient for senior transit access in cities and towns larger and smaller than Washington, and to mandate such restrictive, almost penalizing actions for visitors not used to such restrictions in their hometowns is not symbolic of what the people's government should be presenting. As a travel agent with 20 years experience focused on seniors, disabled veterans who have sacrificed for this country, and those with certifiable disabilities and special needs, as prescribed by the Social Security Administration, I have a moral responsibility to organize the downtrodden and alert the media as to this travesty. We've taken such measures in Richmond, and we've taken such measures in Kansas City, both of which have had positive impact. Now we are here. So fighting for our right as disabled is something we have to do here as well. I hope the board, and through them, the rank and file of WMATA, will honor our right to be treated fairly and without penalty. I look forward to interacting with the board on these issues, hopefully in an atmosphere of congeniality, but irregardless of how we are received, the people will be heard and the truth will set us free.
Our next comment is from Ruth Woollett of Arlington County, Virginia. I am commenting on WMATA purchasing CNG vehicles. New CNG vehicles and infrastructure will be used for 20 years. DC cannot meet climate goals doing this. Fleets must be electrified and no more CNG vehicles should be purchased.
This is from Robin Wins of Washington, D.C. WMATA needs to act swiftly to electrify its Metrobus fleet so that DC residents can breathe cleaner air and so that the city can be on track to meet its clean energy commitments. As a carless DC resident, I would be more likely to take Metrobus as opposed to walking or biking if I knew the bus I would be riding was not emitting nitrous oxides and other pollution that harms my and my neighbor's health, or releasing climate change causing CO2. DC should be a leader in electrifying its bus fleet for the benefit of all DMV residents and the climate.
Our next comment is from Steve Banashek of Alexandria, Virginia. I'm a 30-year-plus resident of Alexandria and live about equidistant between the Braddock Road and King Street stations. While Dash has put 6 electric buses into regular service, is expecting 8 more electric buses this year, and has committed to electrifying their fleet by 2035, Metro has made no such commitment, much less put any electric buses into service. Also locally, the DC Circulator has had 14 electric buses in service for a couple of years now and has plans to fully electrify their fleet before 2030. Montgomery County's Ride-On and Prince George's County's The Bus are electrifying their fleets. And it's not just local transit. Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, Seattle, and New York City have all committed to electrified bus fleets. It's time Metro lives up to the Clean Energy DC Act's requirement to electrify 50% of the bus fleet by 2030 and be all electric no later than 2045, preferably sooner. Metro should also commit to phasing out the purchase of fossil fuel buses by 2025 and halt investments in fossil fuel infrastructure, such as the CNG fueling station at the Shepherd Parkway bus garage that is likely to be a stranded asset before its intended lifespan. Instead, invest in en-route charging infrastructure at Metro's rail stations. The King Street Metro station just had its bus bay area rebuilt, but I suspect charging infrastructure was not even considered. That was a lost opportunity for Metro, Dash, Rex, and others that serve the station. I suspect that opportunity exists at Metro's other suburban rail stations. The recent Sierra Club report outlined the environmental, frontline community, and economic benefits of Metro bus fleet electrification. It's disheartening that Metro's fossil fuel buses are continuing to blunt the benefits of electrification from Dash, DC Circulator, Ride-On, and the bus. It's disheartening that Metro's fossil fuel buses continue to foul the air and contribute to climate change. It's time for Metro to follow the Sierra Club report recommendations and live up to the Clean Energy DC Act by committing to go electric and to get started now.
This comment is from Rebecca Wilden of the Sierra Club. WMATA board members, my name is Rebecca Wilden. I'm a senior campaign representative for the Clean Transportation for All campaign with the National Sierra Club. In October of 2020, 18 organizations released a report calling on WMATA to electrify the bus fleet. Over the last 7 months, we have not heard any concrete plans from you to do exactly that, even after residents testified that they wanted you to take action. Attached is a petition signed by 783 residents of the DMV area, urging you to publicly commit to meeting and ideally exceeding Clean Energy Act electrification timelines for 2030, 2035, 2040, and 2045, as numerous other transit agencies are doing. Publicly releasing a bus electrification plan in 2021. The plan should include opportunity for input from the general public, government agencies, WMATA workers, utility commissions in Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Maryland, and other transit agencies. Phasing out the purchase of new internal combustion engine buses immediately and publicly committing to stop buying diesel buses by 2025. Prioritizing the deployment of electric buses in low and moderate income neighborhoods and environmental justice communities to ensure electrification benefits Metro residents who are disproportionately
harmed by smog and other transportation-related air pollution. Transportation is now responsible for more carbon pollution than any other sector of the U.S. economy, and cities across the country are demonstrating that transit electrification offers a local solution to help address this global problem. Given that it serves the National Capital Region, WMATA has an opportunity to lead on climate and public health and save metro area taxpayers money at the same time. WMATA's plans for an equitable and sustainable electric bus future can and should be accomplished without raising fares for the riders who depend on WMATA every day. Do the right thing.
Our next comment is from Sherry Kanka, also the Sierra Club. Cities around the country are transitioning to all-electric bus fleets. WMATA should too. Pollution from diesel buses drives up asthma rates, with children and low-income communities bearing the greatest burden. A 100% electric WMATA bus fleet would save DMV residents more than $8 million per year in healthcare costs, according to a 2020 Sierra Club report. Please make the commitment to phase out the purchase of fossil fuel buses by 2025, stop investing in CNG infrastructure, and 100% electrify the bus fleet by 2045 or earlier for healthier, more resilient communities and climate action.
This comment is from Elliot Negan, Union of Concerned Scientists. This week, 52 elected officials, 26 public health, environmental, faith, and labor groups, and nearly 800 residents from a Washington metropolitan area sent a clear message to Metro. Set a target date to completely electrify your bus fleet within the next 2 decades. Stop buying fossil fuel buses after your current contract. Abandon plans to install new methane fueling equipment, and prioritize introducing electric buses in low and moderate income neighborhoods that have disproportionately suffered from pollution. Bus systems across the country are way ahead of Metro. Los Angeles Metro plans to electrify its 2,320 buses by 2028. San Francisco's buses will be all electric by 2035. And fleets in Chicago, Seattle, and New York City, which has nearly 6,000 buses, will be all electric by 2040. Even smaller local bus fleets are surpassing Metro. Alexandria's Dash bus system will have 14 electric buses by the end of this year. The DC Circulator system plans to be all electric by 2029. And Montgomery County's Ride-On system, which acquired 4 electric buses last year, plans to add another 10 by next year. Montgomery County also plans to electrify its entire 1,400 school bus fleet by 2035. We haven't heard a peep from Metro staff since last November about Metro's sustainability plans, and apparently the topic is again not on the Metro board agenda this week. The public deserves transparency about your plans. What is the status of your 12-bus pilot project? Why do you need 2 years to determine what kind of electric bus best suits your needs? Why are you planning to waste more than $5 million on a new methane fueling facility when it will certainly become a stranded asset? Other bus transit agencies are faced with the same challenges as Metro, but they are forging ahead with their bus electrification plans, pandemic or no pandemic. Now that the pandemic is receding and your budget has stabilized, it's time that you stop slow walking the transition to an electric bus fleet. We are facing a climate crisis and have to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels as quickly as possible. Metro should be a leader, not a laggard.
Our next public comment is from David Barron with Earth Justice. Members of the WMATA board, we urge WMATA to immediately begin electrifying its bus fleet on a schedule in line with or faster than that set forth in the 2019 Clean Energy DC Act. Switching to zero-emission buses is a matter of public health. Even the lowest emitting fossil fuel buses emit dangerous pollution that can lead to asthma attacks, emergency room visits, hospitalization, and premature death. EPA classifies diesel exhaust as likely to cause cancer in humans, and fossil-fueled buses emit large volumes of greenhouse gases at a time when the threats of climate change have never been greater. Electric buses are also less costly overall due to lower operating and maintenance costs. A Sierra Club analysis using an Argonne National Laboratories model estimates that electrifying 50% of WMATA's fleet by 2030 would save WMATA more than $350 million on lifetime costs compared with the total cost of ownership of WMATA's current fleet. By 2040, with 90% of the bus fleet electric, those savings increase to more than $440 million. Unfortunately, WMATA is currently on track to acquire hundreds of new fossil fuel buses between now and 2030. Buses that, according to WMATA's 2017 fleet management plan, will likely stay on the road for 15 years each. Rather than locking the region into a climate-polluting fleet for decades, WMATA must stop buying fossil fuel buses and promptly transition to zero-emitting vehicles. WMATA's current pilot plan for 14 electric buses in 2021, while welcome, falls far short of what's needed for a bus fleet totaling around 1,500. New York, Chicago, Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, and LA have all committed to fully electrify their bus fleets. WMATA can and must do the same. And our final public comment is a voicemail from Erica Lee that I'll play now.
Hi, my name is Erica Lee, and I would like to register my support for electrifying the WMATA bus line, as I know that the City of Washington understands that climate change is a massive threat to the well-being of our residents and our city, and that the city, we hope, should be doing everything they can to make sure that our public transit system is not using dirty fossil fuels that further exacerbate the issue. So I just want to thank you for your efforts to make our public transit system as sustainable as possible and keep our city and our residents healthy and green. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.
That concludes our public comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pasek. And thank you to everyone who submitted comments today. And we will have staff do the appropriate follow-up on several of those issues. So next we'll hear from our Accessibility Advisory Committee Chair, Phil Posner. Phil, good morning. I see you there.
Good morning. It's good to see everybody today.
The floor is yours.
Spring is in the air along with the cicadas. The AAC started the month with a productive visit from Mr. Wiedefeld, who gave us a detailed and understandable update on budget issues for 2020, 2021, and 2022. We had a good discussion on WMATA's reopening strategy with input from the AAC and public about bus rail safety, service changes, and needs to increase ridership for rail, which is down 85% in rail and 60% in bus. The discussion followed very closely what Ms. Bowersox presented in her focus groups about safety being a real issue, reliability being a secondary issue. The enhanced late night service was going to be incredibly valuable, as well as the ongoing infrastructure and preventive maintenance projects. We did discuss fair policy, since we knew that the board was going to look at fair policy. And we were looking at it, particularly as it affected Metro access, and came to a conclusion that a flat fare would be beneficial for both WMATA and fare box recovery, as well as for the ridership. And as to the development of a flat fare, we felt it was strongly up to WMATA to develop a number that was first acceptable to the Federal Transportation Commission, secondly, fair to the riding public, easy to understand, and also will provide sufficient fare box recovery to be sustainable. Later in the meeting, we met with Nibase and the 8,000 design team, who showed us the working schedule for development of the 8,000 rail cars that will be added to the fleet. And we spent a lot of time talking about the good things on the 7,000 for accessibility, and for safety, definitely the intercar barriers were important. And we're looking forward to working closely with them over the 3-year schedule as the new cars are put into service. We also recommended a similar presentation to the RAC, which they did give the following day. And so I think that's moving along very, very well. At our bus rail subcommittee, we had a wonderful presentation about announcements and also about the new escalator projects that are going in the various stations. And one thing that was pointed out extensively from the low vision and blind community was the current danger of the lighting on the side walls of the escalators over the steps, and the fact that the brightness is so bright, it is blinding and blanches out their vision. And it makes it almost impossible for them to use the escalators since they cannot see the steps. Moving from street lighting onto that blinding light on the escalator, or from platform lighting and mezzanine lighting onto those steps. And we're hoping that Ms. Lopez and our committee can work with the escalator people to have that made more usable. The other thing that was presented was the demonstration of some of the platform changes being made. And once again, we discussed the usability of benches within the system on platforms. The other thing that was very interested, which would be helpful for Metro Access, is there is a device called AERA, A-E-R-A, used by the blind community, which is a vision guide that is available for pay. And certain federal employees do get an enhancement to be able to pay for that. But for the general public, what AERA has done, it has worked with local jurisdictions, such as the Smithsonian, and developed what they call AERA-free zones, so that anybody with a smartphone in those areas, such as the Smithsonian Institution or the Capitol, can have this guide available. And what we're asking is regions where the blind are using Metro Access to shopping malls or areas where it is difficult to navigate, to see if some negotiation could be made for a private partnership to make those AERA-free zones to help for its use. That's all we have to present. It's been a busy month. I would like to take a moment just to invite Ms. Baber, as the new member of the board, to come visit us at an AAC meeting or bus rail or Metro Access, and of course an open invitation for everyone else to come. We've always enjoyed Mr. Smederberg, who's been really good when he's come in. Ms. Jitterby has been with us, and of course, Mr. Wiedefeld. So it's an open invitation for any of you to visit our meetings or come ride with us. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Phil. Appreciate all the work you and the AAC do, obviously. Any questions for Philip?
Mr. Bolger has taken a day off, so I may not have a question.
I don't have a question for Phil, but I do want to thank you for the invite, and I do want to take you up on coming to one of your meetings. So if you could just let me know when they are.
We will send you an invitation. We're currently recruiting our newest member from DC, so it would be great to have you come with us also.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay. All right, thanks, Phil. Next, we move on to the Riders Advisory Council Chair, Brian Meyer. Brian, I see you there on the screen. Welcome.
Yes,
the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Chairman Smedberg and members of the board. Thank you so much for having me today. I'll try not to be too repetitive since I know you all have the report from the Riders Advisory Council for May. My name is Brian Meyer, and I'm the newly elected chair of the Riders Advisory Council, and I represent the Commonwealth of Virginia. I just wanted to start off by thanking the board, the WMATA staff, the RAC, the AAC, and members of the public for helping all of us sustain the mission of the organization of WMATA, of providing a safe, reliable, affordable, and lately what's been very relevant, clean transportation system to all of our citizens in the greater DC metro area. And all of this despite the public health and socio-political challenges of the past year. So just thank you very much, everyone, for that. Secondly, I'd just like to welcome Sid Divakaruni from Maryland and Daryl Brewer from the District of Columbia. They were recently elected vice chairs at our last RAC meeting. And so that's been very exciting, and I'm looking forward to working with them. Over the past few months, we have welcomed several new members of the Riders Advisory Council, myself included. And so we've been busy onboarding and orienting ourselves to some of the intricacies of WMATA. And so I just wanted to thank WMATA and the board staff for presenting to us on several occasions about some of the more pressing issues facing the system. Thirdly, in an effort to ensure a seamless and orderly transition to what effectively will be a new metro system designed for a world in which riding habits are changing and expectations for public transportation are changing, the Riders Advisory Council stands ready to advise the board on some of the most pressing issues and developments facing Metro, whether that be capital projects like Phase 2 of the Silver Line or the rollout of the 8000 series rail card. And thank you so much, Phil, for coming to our Riders Advisory Council meeting and bringing up some of those accessibility issues to us. We really greatly appreciated that. Whether it's ensuring an equitable and effective fare structure for all of the services that Metro provides, or maybe even diversifying revenue sources to create a more resilient operating budget. The RAC is really excited for further discussions around some of those issues. And lastly, to ensure that the efforts between the RAC and the board are complementary as possible, our immediate goal is to devise a working plan centered around a core set of mutually agreed upon priorities that impact citizens of the board. And I also think it's important to note that while a main tenet of our existence as the RAC is to advise the board, I think it's also incumbent upon ourselves to be ambassadors for the Metro system and to promulgate some of the virtues of public transportation. And so whether it's encouraging more citizen presence at the RAC or designing a more engaging form of social media, the Riders Advisory Council must work to promote the Metro system as much as possible and as often as possible. So anyways, I just want to thank you all, and I'd be happy to answer any questions or concerns you may have. If not, thank you very much for having me.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Thank you very much. We look forward to working with you in your new role. Any questions for Brian? Okay. Good morning.
Thank you.
We'll be in touch. Thank you. Now we'll move on to the report of the chair. I know I speak on behalf of all the board members when I say how excited we are to welcome our newest board member from the District of Columbia, Lucinda Babers. As mentioned earlier, our board corporate secretary swore her in a few days ago following her WMATA appointment from the DC Council so she could participate in our earlier meetings. However, we would like to take this opportunity to formally introduce Lucinda and have the ceremonial swearing in. Ms. Babers was appointed Deputy Mayor for Operations and Infrastructure in the District of Columbia in 2019. She previously served as the Director of the District of Columbia Department of Motor Vehicles. As the DMV Director, Lucinda led the agency in significant and innovative changes, including the closure and opening of 3 service centers, the elimination of passenger vehicle safety inspections, and added numerous online services. Before coming to the District of Columbia DMV, Lucinda served in several senior management positions at Amtrak. And Lucinda is no stranger to DC government. She previously worked on management reform projects for the city manager during the control board era and served as an internal consultant and project manager for the city administrator and corrections. Lucinda started her career as an officer in the military. She holds a Master of Science in Business from Johns Hopkins University and a Bachelor of Industrial Engineering from the Georgia Institute of Technology. Now I'll ask Lucinda to please raise her right hand and repeat after me. I, please state your name.
I, Lucinda Babers,
do hereby solemnly swear
do hereby solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution and laws of the District of Columbia,
and the Constitution and laws of the District of Columbia,
from which I was appointed
from which I was appointed
as a principal director
as a principal director
of the Board of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority,
of the Board of the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority,
and will faithfully discharge the duties of the office
and will faithfully discharge the duties of the office
upon which I am about to enter.
upon which I am about to enter.
Congratulations, Lucinda. We look very much forward to your leadership and experience on the board and working with you. Before I go to the next item, Lucinda, we'll turn it over to you if you'd like to say a few words, and then I'll turn to Ms. Gideby Jenkins.
So I am incredibly excited to be joining the board, and I look forward to sharing the district's perspective with everyone and just making sure that Metro continues to be one of the best subway and bus systems in the country, not just the region. I am an avid Metro rider. My tagline is for my family and my colleagues is Metro gets you there. And so I have not been riding recently due to the pandemic, but I look forward to getting back to on board and continuing to contribute to the economic development of the region. So thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you. Stephanie?
I just want to add my echoing of how excited I am for you to be joining. It's a valuable addition and voice. For the last at least 18 months, being the only woman and person of color, unfortunately, to some extent, now more than ever, I think it's important for us to really have a good reflection of what the region looks like in so many ways. And I'm excited for your leadership and your voice on Metro. I also just want to thank you because I think even prior to your service and your agreement of joining the board, you've been a great advocate for Metro within DC government, and your leadership will be deeply appreciated on this board, I know in advance. So I just thank you for your willingness to serve. I'm excited to have you. And as always, Chairman Smedberg, thank you for your leadership and the ways in which you continue to ensure that we are doing the best that we can to support Metro and the region. Welcome.
Thank you, Stephanie.
All right, now we'll move on to our next item. Now it's time to make some new committee assignments based on Ms. Baber's appointment here. To complete, well, we have two items. First, we have to complete officer elections before the new fiscal year. And I am establishing the board's election committee. And then we need to fill the DC vacancy on the Finance and Capital Committee. Therefore, I would like to move the following. The Elections Committee will be comprised of Director Gideby Jenkins as chair, Director Goldman as vice chair, and members Rouse and Letourneau. And Director Babers will fill the DC vacancy on the Finance and Capital Committee. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Secretary Slater. So we have a motion and a second. Ms. Ellison, please call the roll.
Chair Smedberg?
Aye.
Vice Chair Gideby Jenkins?
Aye.
Vice Chair Goldman?
Aye.
Mr. Costa?
Aye.
Mr. Letourneau?
Aye.
Mrs. Babers?
Aye.
Secretary Slater?
Aye.
Mr. Rouse?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. That concludes my report. Now I'll turn the floor over to the General Manager for his report this morning. Mr. Wiedefeld.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief given the time, but I did want to build a little bit on what was discussed in the Finance Committee. As we all know, across the region, jurisdictions are moving to the next phase in their reopening plans. with many businesses, venues, and services preparing to increase capacity and welcome back customers and employees. With these changes going into effect, Metro is also taking steps to welcome riders back and support the region, as we discussed. A little bit more detail, starting January 6th, Metro bus customers will have more options with service improvements added to approximately 60 routes. This includes extending service on 36 routes until 2 a.m. every day of the week. This will help provide safe, reliable transportation options for customers who work or travel late at night, including those at restaurants, entertainment venues, and other locations that may be expanding their hours. On another dozen routes, additional weekday coverage and frequencies will be added. Combined with the bus service changes implemented in March, most Saturday and Sunday coverage will now be restored, and another set of bus service improvements is scheduled for this fall, as has been discussed. With more buses coming more often, we're fully prepared to accommodate growing return of riders. Well, Metro Rail service will continue to operate at 80% of pre-COVID levels. As you know, we're moving roughly 15% of the ridership of pre-COVID levels. While rail ridership has been slower to return, we're confident that with the vaccination rates and improvements and the region opening, that more and more people will come back to rail, and we believe we have the capacity to handle that, as was discussed through the summer into early fall. So with that, that concludes my comments for today, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Wiedefeld. Any questions or comments for the General Manager? Okay, seeing none, I'll turn now to, we have the report by the Finance and Capital Committee, and I'll turn the chair over to Vice Chair Slater, Secretary Slater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a brief report. The following item was referred to the board at this morning's Finance and Capital Committee meeting. It's a Series 2021A dedicated bond resolution issuance. Staff sought approval of the supplemental bond resolution, terms of the sale, bond purchase agreement, and offering statement to issue the Series 2021A dedicated revenue bonds to support the capital program. Mr. Chair, I move approval.
Thank you, Mr. Slater. So we have a motion on the table by Secretary Slater. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Babers. Is there any discussion? If so, please raise your hand. Seeing none, Ms. Ellison, please call the roll.
Chair Smedberg?
Aye.
Vice Chair Gideby Jenkins?
Aye.
Vice Chair Goldman?
Aye.
Mr. Costa?
Aye.
Mr. Letourneau?
Aye.
Ms. Babers?
Aye.
Secretary Slater?
Aye.
Mr. Rouse?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison.
That concludes the Finance and Capital Committee report.
Thank you, Secretary Slater. Next, we'll move on to the consent items. We have 3 items on the board's consent agenda today. I'd like to move approval of the following. A, authorization of a public hearing on proposed changes at the Franconia Springfield Metro Station. Staff seeks board authorization to hold a public hearing and conduct outreach in conjunction with the Virginia Department of Transportation regarding the proposed extension of Frontier Drive, additional bus bays, and modification to the station's road network. B, fiscal year 2022 Virginia PREA funding agreement. Staff seeks board approval to execute an agreement with the Passenger Rail Investment and Improvement Act PREA funding agreement between Metro and the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation to extend the existing agreement through fiscal year 2022. And C, Local Plan 2 amendment. Staff seeks approval to amend Local 2 retirement plan to eliminate the retirement committee and allow the plan's trustees to assume the duties of the day-to-day plan administrators. I'd like to move approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Gideby Jenkins. We have a motion and a second. Ms. Ellison, please call the roll.
Chair Smedberg?
Aye.
Vice Chair Gideby Jenkins?
Aye.
Vice Chair Goldman?
Aye.
Mr. Costa?
Aye.
Mr. Letourneau?
Aye.
Ms. Babers?
Aye.
Secretary Slater?
Aye.
And Mr. Rouse?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. Now we have the item that was originally on the consent item. We pulled it off as an action item. and that is a temporary waiver of special events fees. Staff is seeking approval to authorize the general manager and CEO to waive the fee for special services to support special events and to waive the requirement that a sponsoring organization requests those services. The waiver would be in effect through January 1st, 2022. I'll go ahead and move approval. I know there's a member, maybe two, want to discuss this a little bit. So I'll go ahead and move approval. Is there a second?
I second that, Mr.
Seconded
Chair.
by Mr. Goldman, and I'll turn the floor over to you, Mr. Goldman.
Thank you, Mr. Smedberg. I just wanted to state that the resolution is really here in two parts. It lists a number of professional sports teams as automatically by vote of the board being entitled to this waiver in the event of a late game where services would be needed after 11 p.m. But it also provides for other sponsoring organizations to ask the general manager for such treatment if their events would go beyond 11 o'clock or require service early in the morning. And so my view as one board member is that while we have not included in the approved group such organizations as DC United, the professional soccer team, or the University of Maryland football team, should they have a late night game, or such things as a Bruce Springsteen concert or a Taylor Swift concert if vaccination rates increase and we're going back to a more normal lifetime experience in the fall and concerts are available, that the general manager should take those requests for late night service from those organizations as well. Similarly, consider them as the ones specifically named and recommend to the board that we provide approval for an extension of special services and late night services to those organizations as well as the listed professional sports teams. Thank you. So that's the view that I take in urging approval of this resolution today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Do we have the general counsel online, Ms. Lee?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning. I think to address Mr. Goldman's concerns, I believe the additional whereas and resolve clause would take care of that issue.
Yes, it does. It just the sports organizations that are listed have the waiver. For any other special events, large events with other sports organizations, the general manager would just bring that request to the board. The board could, of course, approve the waiver for those organizations as well.
Yeah, okay. And while I have you, I think we also need to make a correction, actually, and I actually have the red line version in front of me, and the date that this would be in effect through would actually be December 31st, 2021, and not January 1st, 2022. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So we'll make note of that for the record. Okay, is there any other discussion? All right, hearing none, Ms. Ellison, please call the roll.
Chair Smedberg?
Aye.
Vice Chair Gideby-Jenkins?
Aye.
Vice Chair Goldman?
Aye.
Mr. Costa?
Aye.
Mr. Letourneau?
Aye.
Ms. Babers?
Aye.
Secretary Slater?
Aye.
And Mr. Rouse?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to the reports by the jurisdictions. Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. I personally don't have anything to report right now from the Commonwealth. Mr. Letourneau, anything from NVTC at this point?
No, just that we are continuing discussions about fare policy and expect that, in fact, our Metro Committee of NVTC is meeting in a week for that fare policy discussion and expect to get some good input from the jurisdictions on that topic.
Okay, thank you. District of Columbia, Ms. Gideby-Jenkins.
I'll defer to Ms. Babers.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention that the mayor has announced that the district will be lifting most restrictions for COVID on May 21st, except for bars, nightclubs, and sporting venues. However, on June 11th, those restrictions on those entities will also be lifted. So the only requirement we will have in the district come June 11th is the wearing of masks still indoors when you're in a congregate setting. Also for DC government, on May 3rd, up to 25% of employees had to return to work. And then on June 7th, up to 50% of employees have to return to work, which will include all managers. And then on July 12th, 100% of employees will have to return to work. And we're still trying to work out and get the health guidance because this was put in place before the mayor's latest announcement on Monday about the May 21st and June 11th. But as we move forward to reopen our city, we do know that our surrounding jurisdictions are also slowly reopening. And so we will look to WMATA to see, what can we do as it relates to any restrictions that WMATA still has in place that may be contrary to what the various districts have in place.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that update. And I also believe there was an announcement from Governor Hogan yesterday as well about reopening to a large degree. So thank you for that update, and obviously an important one. Mr. Goldman, WSTC.
Yes, I have nothing specific to report, but I will yield to Secretary Slater, who could perhaps update us as well on what Governor Hogan is proposing for reopening measures in the forthcoming few months.
Sure, absolutely. We are working towards that gradual reopening with percentages. There are no longer any restrictions on businesses, those types of things. So we're trying to do it slowly and safely and as best we can as our vaccination rates continue to go up, but we're having a lot of success in getting them deployed. So between that and our efforts focused on the pipeline the last few days, that's where we've been.
Thank you. And Mr. Rouse, anything from the federal government perspective, or Mr. Costa?
Nothing from me.
And nothing from me also. No, nothing from me also. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Tony. Okay, with no other business or further business to come before the board, we will stand adjourned, and I will move to executive session. In accordance with the bylaws, I, Paul Smedberg, request that the Board of Directors convene an executive session to discuss the following matters pursuant to Article 2, Paragraph 9, subsections A, budgetary matters that may affect legal positions, WMATA contracts, or sensitive relationships with local jurisdictions and the federal government, and C, personnel or labor issues, including discussions of labor contracts and labor negotiations, consideration or interviews of candidates for employment, and the assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, or resignation of individuals, and D, contractual or other matters involving proprietary concerns and the investment of public funds where discussion in public would adversely affect the financial interests of WMATA. F, safety and security matters where premature release would compromise public safety. H, development of WMATA position or strategy on a pending or proposed federal and state legislation. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Secretary Slater. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. We will now convene in executive session. Thank you all for being with us this morning.